All people have successes and failures. It's human. So if we aren't free to fail, how in the world are we going to learn? How are we going to grow? How are we going to improve? With self-compassion is how do you show up for yourself? And so normally what happens when something difficult happens is we feel threatened. There's a problem, and often we're the problem. People just assume self-compassion means letting yourself off the hook, giving up. It's not that at all. Quite the opposite.
The toughest thing you can do is be kind to yourself. And you don't always hear that very often because they're counterintuitive. When I first started coming across this idea of mental toughness and mental fitness, self-compassion was like the last thing that was on my radar. Oh, be kind to yourself. You'll perform at a higher level. But the reality is, in reading this particular individual's book that you're about to meet and coming across her work, self-compassion, I had already understood is this idea of being kind to yourself, but I never put those words together. Self-compassion. So today you're going to meet the expert on self-compassion herself. Please meet the author, an incredible, kind individual, not just to herself, but to others. Dr. Kristin Neff, how are you today?
I'm great. Happy to be here.
We're talking about self-compassion at the top. How did you first start thinking about the problem of self-compassion in your own experience?
So for me, it happened at my last year of graduate school. I was going to Berkeley, and I was under a lot of stress. In my personal life, I had gotten married young and divorced young, and I was feeling like an utter failure at relationships. And in terms of stress, I was about to get my PhD, but with no guarantees whatsoever that I would even get a job interview. The market was very tight. I thought, oh my God, I'm going to be overqualified for any job if I don't get a job in academia. And so I learned that mindfulness meditation was good for stress. And I was in Berkeley, for goodness sake. So there was actually a meditation group near where I lived. Much to my surprise, the first time I went to this group, it was actually in the Buddhist tradition. The woman leading the group talked about the importance of having compassion, not only for others, but also for yourself. And it was like, what? I'd heard about compassion for others. I was a believer. I thought I was a pretty compassionate person, but I'd never really considered that you could intentionally practice. This is something you can actually do, learn how to do to have compassion for yourself. And so I remember the first night, well before I figured out mindfulness meditation, it took a while to figure that out. But the very first night I went home and I started speaking compassionately to myself, like, yeah, Kristen, you have a failed marriage and, it hurts, but it happens to everyone. It's just part of the learning process. It's okay. You'll grow from this. You don't have to shame yourself for it. And like the stressful job situation, it'll be okay. I'll be here for you. I said, in other words, I started talking to myself like I would speak to a friend compassionately. And I was just so struck by the immediate difference it made in my ability to cope with all the stress I was feeling. It's not like I had to wait after practicing a week. Like immediately, it's like, okay, I can handle this. I can bear this. It's not quite as horrific as I thought it was. And so then I did get a job eventually, a couple years later at a UT Austin, and I decided to start researching it. That's how I got where I am today.
It's funny that our greatest pain can be our greatest teacher, and then our expertise in like this weird way. It's almost like what sends us down the rabbit hole is like, wow, I want to figure this out. And suddenly everybody else can benefit from like the worst things that ever happened to us. In terms of how self-compassion has enhanced your performance.
Yes.
What are some of the ways you alluded to, like the practical, actionable, immediate response that your nervous system, your heart had?
Yes.
It sounded like you talk a lot about the softening of the heart.
Yeah.
After you had that cathartic experience of healing yourself in the moment, what happened next?
To really maybe just kind of to back up a little bit to explain what self-compassion is. If you just look at the Latin roots, passion is suffer, come is with. So it's basically how do you show up for pain, those painful moments, those difficult moments. And usually we think about how do you show up for other people. With self-compassion is how do you show up for yourself? And so normally what happens when something difficult happens is we feel threatened. There's a problem, and often we're the problem. So, sympathetic nervous system gets activated. We're in threat defense mode, go into fight, flight, or freeze. So we fight ourselves, or we flee into a sense of shame and isolation, or we freeze and ruminate and get stuck. And even though it's actually a natural evolved behavior, it's really counterproductive for, first of all, handling what you're going through, because not only are you in a difficult situation, you're also stressed out, you're freaked out, you've got all this anxiety. And in terms of performance, right? Let's say you're wanting to reach some goal and you have a setback or something. If you go into that reactive mode and stressed mode and you judge yourself and you make it worse and you feel even more anxious, you create performance anxiety, and then you can't focus. I mean, look at athletes, professional athletes. You can see when they start missing their serve, and then they start judging themselves, or they get really riled up about it, and then just down they go, right? And that's what happens to all of us. When we criticize ourselves, we're just exacerbating our anxiety. We're undermining our self confidence. We're making it worse. And so, what self compassion is, it's not like saying, "Oh, there's no problem, sweetheart." It's not like little, it's not sugarcoating, because that's not compassionate. If there's a problem, there really is a problem. If you're at a high level tennis match, you need to try to make your serve. But the thing is, the way you help yourself is not through criticism. It's not like you better get it right or else. It's through encouragement. And again, using the athletic metaphor again, because it's so relevant here, a really good supportive coach gives it to you straight, what's not working, what you need to improve, but does it because they have your best interest and you can feel it. Maybe they're even pretty firm and hard, but it's coming from because they believe in you, they want to get the best out of you. It's because they care. And so self compassion is like the motivation of care, whereas self criticism is the motivation of fear. You better fix it or get it better, get it right, or else you're going to be a horrible person, or the world's going to fall in, or people will hate you. And so when you use the motivation of care, what happens is, again, just at the physiological level. So as mammals, we're evolved to interpret care as a signal of safety. So when we're there for ourselves, we feel safe. We have lots of research showing cortisol levels go down, inflammation goes down, heart rate variability increases, heart rate coherence. Our physiology starts to calm down. So that's at the physical level. And then mentally, again, we start to feel safe. Okay, well, maybe I can take a risk. This is number one point. Maybe I can learn from this situation. We don't take it so personally when it's not about me. Am I a good person or not? Or am I a good athlete or not? It's just like, okay, this happened. Ouch, that hurt. Well, it happens to all people. What can I learn from it? Then that facilitates learning and growth. And that's precisely why it helps improve performance, because you're in the right mental space to adopt what's called the learning and growth orientation. And that allows you to perform at your best.
When I teach these seminars to attorneys and I go through the different elements of mental toughness and mental strength, self compassion has become an element because it's contextualized based on, like I was saying at the top, your work. But again, I always used to refer to it as being kind to yourself. So whenever I'm in the middle of doing an intense challenge, I had like a 50+ mile run that I did in September. Like 40 miles in, I'm like hating every single step that I'm taking. And the last thing on, like, like, it's just this negative spiral. And I'm like, why did you have to do 58? Who do you think you are? Like, what are you trying to accomplish? What are you trying to prove? This is the biggest mistake you made. Even standing up in court, going up against, high performing adversaries from incredible law schools and all these different things. I'm like, I don't deserve to be here. Like, I'm the wrong person for just this negative self talk. And the last thing on earth I ever would have thought is this self compassion as a tool. And you talked about care as this mechanism to help us reduce our stress and signal to our body as a sign of safety. There's one exercise that you talk about in your book about these three different people, where you talk about a trusted friend, yourself, and a third party observer. And you're having a conversation amongst all three, and you're putting yourself in three different chairs to help get through a difficult situation that may require some form of self care. How do you come across thinking about the problem of self compassion in that actionable way?
A lot of how we address self compassion, the good news, the reason it's not rocket science is because we have so much experience being compassionate to others. So, for instance, the observer, we've all seen what happens when people like beat themselves up mercilessly and how much it doesn't help them. We've also been a trusted friend. We've been a trusted friend to others. We know that if your friend comes to you and says, I'm trying to like make this deadline and I just can't do it. I'm such a loser. Why did I even, we know that if you say, yeah, you're right. You're stupid. You're lame. Give up now. It's not going to help. And yet somehow we say that to ourselves, thinking that, like, well, maybe if it's painful enough, I'll just work a little harder. We have our personal experience knowing that the best thing you can do is, first of all, it's okay. I love you even if you fail. It's not why I care about you. So you make it not, not make it personal, the success. But what you say, if you're a really good friend, is, how can I help? And so when we say that to ourselves, how can I help? What do I need right now? That very supportive mindset. And oftentimes that we think, well, actually, maybe I need a break, or maybe I can, talk to a friend, or maybe I could take some other way of approaching the situation that I hadn't thought of before. We know that type of support is actually much more effective than just battering ourselves with criticism. We've seen it. Again, that's the thing. It's almost obvious, but there's two reasons why we don't do it. A, our brain is actually built to be in threat mode, because our ancestors, who are like self-compassionate and like, just kick back and like took it easy, they're more likely to be eaten by lions than our ancestors who are like, what's the problem? Where's that lion? What's happening? I got to protect myself. So part of that's the way our brain operates. But also our culture. I mean, think about it. You weren't raised with this idea that it's good to be kind to yourself. You were told, don't be self centered. That's what I was told. We're told, don't pity yourself. By the way, just to say, pity is different than self compassion, because compassion by its nature is, it's shared. It's like, this is the human experience. All people have successes and failures. It's human. Where self pity is me, poor me. It's just me. No one else understands the suffering I'm going through. Right? It's very self focused. But we aren't taught that as kids, so we're going against culture and evolution, which is why we don't do it. But when you think about it, yeah, it's kinda obvious.
It didn't seem like it at first. I feel like once you're on the other side, you can, in hindsight, be like, oh, yeah, should have just been kinder to myself. I would have had a much easier time going through that experience, because process is so important, how we go about embracing it. Do you see self compassion as part of toughness at all?
I'm a researcher, so it's not just my personal opinion. There's a ton of research showing, I think we can safely say that it is the most one of the most powerful sources of toughness, coping, resilience, grit that we have available to us. Because think about it, if you're in battle, and by the way, there's a lot of research with that. When you're in battle, what's going to make you tough? If you're an ally, it's like, I got your back. What do you need? I'm here with you. That sense of, support. Or if you're an enemy, cutting yourself down. Kneecapping yourself is not going to make you stronger. It's going to make you weaker. This thing about, I can't really be overemphasized, the freedom you get when you have the freedom to fail means you have the freedom to learn. If you can't risk failure because you're afraid of being an imposter, or you're so you can't handle the possible negative feelings, you aren't going to take risks. You aren't going to try new things. You're going to play it safe. If you start messing up, you're going to get anxious and you won't learn new things. I mean, isn't it? People say, failure is our best teacher. Because it is our best teacher. That's a truism because it's true, right? So if we aren't free to fail, how in the world are we going to learn? How are we going to grow? How are we going to improve? But here's the thing, you need the emotional safety to be free to fail. And the emotional safety is, just because you failed doesn't mean that you're a failure. It just means that you made a mistake and you can try again. Really, it's about not taking things personally. Hopefully, an unconditionally loving parent says to their child, I want you to succeed. I will do everything in my power to help you succeed. But if you fail, it won't impact how I feel about you at all. I love you regardless. That's the kind of relationship we want to try to cultivate with ourselves.
The role of ego in all of this is so important to understand, ego and fear. And resilience has this ego component, ego strength, if you will. And you were talking about compassion, or pardon me, self compassion is about suffering. Suffering is a form of purification. You build the ego and the strength through rejection, through failure, right? Everything that you're talking about. How, maybe you could share practical strategies for how high performers can cultivate self compassion in an actionable way.
Really, one of the easiest ways to do it is by working with physiology, because the nervous system is so involved in this. The moment we start criticizing ourselves, our cortisol levels go up, for instance. The whole sympathetic nervous system. A very easy way to counter that is to do something like put your hands on your heart or your face or some sort of touch, hold your hand. Because again, as mammals, we evolved to interpret kind, supportive touch as a signal of care. Way well before we have language, our parents communicated, "I'm here for you, I care about you" through touch. So we've got research showing that some sort of touch there's a study that came out of Berkeley that showed you only need to do it for 30 seconds a little supportive touch, maybe a few words of support like, "Hey, I'm here for you. I know this is hard. What do you need right now?" 30 seconds a day is enough to significantly increase your self-compassion levels. So working with the body, the physiology, and then adding in the language just because, most of us are pretty verbal creatures, having that language of support. And by the way, sometimes if the word kindness sounds too soft for some people, use support because support, we think of support, it could be like tough and strong. So the word, I kind of actually sometimes prefer the word support because it makes room for that more tough sort of love that actually means firm, maybe very clear. No, you need to do this. This isn't working, but I love you anyway. You know, I love you regardless. It's not making your self-worth conditional on success. See, this is one of the other things I've studied is the difference between self-compassion and self-esteem. So with self-esteem, esteem, just the word esteem is a judgment or an evaluation of worth. In other words, I judge myself to be worthy, typically because I'm special and above average, not okay to be average, or because I've succeeded at those areas that are important to me, which means that if you have a little setback, then you judge yourself not to be worthy, and you have low self-esteem, and then you get performance anxiety, and down you go. Compassion means I am intrinsically worthy just because I'm a human being. The moment you're born, you don't have to earn the right to compassion. It's intrinsic to our humanity. And so that it gives this type of unconditional self-worth. We're worthy when we succeed, we're worthy when we fail, including when we make mistakes or don't reach our goals. So the worth component is taken out of the picture. I'm unconditionally worthy. And then you might say, well, then why would I want to achieve my goals? You want to achieve them because you care. You aren't chasing after self-esteem. You're chasing after a goal because it's meaningful and important to you. But when you do it for that reason, it's much more stable because then you get knocked down, it's okay. You still got your goal. You're doing it because it's important. It also may make you rethink some of your goals. Maybe some of your goals society tells you it's important. Maybe it's not that authentic for you. Then maybe that's not what you should spend your time doing. What do I need? Well, you have to ask, well, then what do I value? What do I care about? And when we're pursuing goals that we value and that are personally meaningful, we're also going to be more have more grit when there's problems and have more resilience to try to reach our goals.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Inside the Inspired. My name is Jonathan Cohen, and I have a quick favor to ask you. If you're getting any value out of this content, please take a second to subscribe to the channel. You help us reach more people, and you can also stay up to date with all the latest content coming your way. Thank you so much for tuning in. I'll catch you in the episode. In your experience and in your research, what are some ways that lawyers, business professionals, professional athletes, how can they buffer burnout effectively?
So the three core symptoms of burnout are exhaustion, right? So if you never ask yourself what you need, if you keep on just pushing yourself with no support or warmth, you're going to get exhausted. So it counters that. But the two other elements, one is what's called depersonalization, which means you stop caring. That's one of the ways, like if you're a lawyer and you're burnt out, you stop caring as much. It's because the more you care, the more exhausting it is, the more impacted you are by the fact that you can't meet all the demands of stress that are placed on you. And so what self-compassion does is it keeps you connected to your heart. It keeps you connected to your caring. It keeps you connected to your values. Again, kind of what you did. Why am I doing this? Why is this important to me? Instead of just chasing after self-esteem. So it reduces depersonalization. And then the third component is a feeling of incompetence, right? Especially if you're a professional, you're used to just killing it all the time. And all of a sudden you just can't even meet your workload because you're burned out, and then you feel like a failure and you feel like you're incompetent. And usually that's partly because of the fact that you've been criticizing yourself for not being able to meet the demands of your work. And so again, self-compassion is an antidote to that by instead of harshly criticizing yourself, being understanding and supportive. So a ton of research showing that self-compassion directly not only reduces burnout, but helps prevent burnout.
And like just zooming in on that real quick, say someone's starting to feel, I mean, this is more upstream than ideally would be more upstream than downstream, but I feel like a lot of people, myself included, you would diagnose burnout symptoms and be like, "Oh, I'm burned out." I think one mistake. I mean, you outline the elements. I understand the elements. Obviously, I'm deferring to you. I understand the elements, and please correct me where I'm wrong. I cynicism.
Yeah, people have different models, but that relates to the depersonalization. You become cynical. You just care less because it's too painful to care. So you become cynical.
The exhaustion was obviously there, and then detachment, which I thought actually aligned with what you were just talking about there. So then I think that one variable that you were addressing that I missed is definitely something I want to bring into my seminars also, because it's largely like in at least the surface level research that I've come across. And I want to get into the actionable component, especially that you address in your workbook, really kind of touches on those three. And I feel like it's important to mention that missing variable because a lot of burnout is self reported. So if people don't know what the elements are that make it up,
Yeah.
they're going to diagnose the wrong issue and then just confuse exhaustion with burnout and be like, oh, I'm tired. And then like try to sleep better when they may not necessarily have a sleeping issue. So when we look at the upstream issues on burnout, how can self compassion help cure what you understand to be some examples of an upstream issue that leads to burnout?
Self-compassion is quite simple. If you again go back to the root is how do you show up for those tough moments? And by the way, in my model, there are three elements. It's not just the kindness and warmth. It's also mindful awareness. In other words, you have to be aware of the fact that you're having a hard time. Sometimes we aren't even aware until like you say it's too late. And then framing it in terms of common humanity. It's really key. And again, this is what differentiates compassion from pity. It's not about me, it's about the human experience. And so anytime you notice you have a little bit of mindfulness, you can say, well, I am so exhausted, or I am feeling cynical, or I am feeling cut off. All you got to do is bring in these three elements. Be aware of that. Yeah, this hurts. This sucks. This is hard. Instead of just pretending it's not there, like shoving it under, you just kind of, okay, this is happening. Acknowledge it. I see it clearly. Bring in the common humanity. It's part of life. So it's partly our culture. We have such an individualistic culture, but we take things so personally. It's all about me. It must say something about me. Other people, these fantasy people, are not having any problems, and it's just me. Right? We have to remember that no, this is the human experience. Everyone struggles. And again, this is how we learn. This is how human beings learn and grow. And human life is difficult. That's just the plan we signed up for when we were born as human beings, right? So not taking it so personally is huge. Remembering that you aren't alone. Then once we don't feel so isolated, that kind of helps us feel safe and connected. And then the kindness and support in whatever way that looks like. It may be just verbal kindness and support, like, yeah, you can talk to yourself, you can use you can talk to yourself directly, you can imagine what you say to a friend or what they would say to you, kind of whatever feels most comfortable. But I might say to myself something like, wow, Kristen, this is really tough. I'm so sorry. This is hard. Well, it happens to everyone. What would be really helpful right now? Like, what do you think would help in this moment? And so even if you don't know the answer to that question, just asking shows care. By just saying, what might you need that could possibly help right now? It shows that your needs are worthy of being attended to and worthy of being met. And then again, language you might use with a friend, like, well, of course you're burned out. Anyone would be burned out given all that you're doing. It's not a failure in you, it's just the situation. So what you say is gonna depend on the situation for sure, and it's gonna vary from situation to situation. But it's just that intention of kindness and support. We feel it. We feel it mentally, emotionally, and in our body. Again, you can do lots of research. Your heart rate actually changes in response to kindness and care.
When you were talking, you had your hand on your heart, I noticed. For those of you that are listening,
This is my
it's
touch. Not everyone's gonna, like, respond to this, but to me, this just goes straight home, you know? Hands on heart or hand on heart.
it's definitely something I'm going to take to heart as well. I feel like because I remember you talked about it in your book as well, where you talk about putting your hand on your arm, literally physically comforting yourself. And I don't know if necessarily each of those exercises will work in every single moment. Like, I think a big mistake people make in general when it comes to stress management is that they treat it as one dimensional. I'm writing something about this now, an article where I see it as more of a holistic approach. And that helps me realize that I need multiple different prescriptions, if you will, to cure the anxiety that, to your point, as you noted, we're mammals. I understand this concept and I guess rationalize this concept. I read Noah Harari's book, Sapiens, where he talks about as humans, we're anxious creatures. So it's in our nature, which to me gave me a license to be like, oh, everyone's anxious. Like, this is totally normal.
Our brains are anxious. That's how they survived.
And it's like, okay, now we just deal with it in a different world. And so I think part of the recovery cycle is important when it comes to bouncing back, being adaptable, cultivating resilience. How does self compassion play a role in the recovery cycle?
The two different forms that I like to talk about are tender self compassion and fierce self compassion, and both play a role in recovery. So, the tender self compassion is all about acceptance. That is being with ourselves, being with our difficult emotions as they are. So, it has kind of, more of a nurturing quality, maybe of a parent toward a child. So when we're stressed or, going through a difficult time, kind of the first stage is often just accepting ourselves. Yeah, I'm stressed and burned out, but I can still care for myself. Yes, accepting this is the way it is. Human beings, our brains, we get stressed, we get anxious, and just being with ourselves in a warm, supportive way. But fierce self compassion is all about taking the action that we can. Again, we can't change everything, but often we can take action to try to help ourselves and alleviate our suffering. And so that's typically more aimed at behaviors and situations. So maybe there's something that I could do differently that would be helpful. Or maybe it's something I can change about my situation. Often our behavior is so intertwined with the people we're around or the situation or the environment. And if we can make a change to our environment or maybe draw a boundary or say no or speak up or change relationship or whatever needs changing, that's another really important way to give ourselves kindness and support that often we don't think about. So it's like I can accept myself and my feelings, but I don't want to just stop there. I also want to see what changes can I make, even if there's small little steps. What can I do differently? And by the way, this feeds into improving our performance because we accept ourselves for the fact that maybe we failed, but the fear self-compassion says, but what can I do differently next time to have a better chance of success because I care? So, we usually need both. So for instance, with fear self-compassion, you may not want to do like something like hands on the heart. Maybe you put a fist on your heart. Or like when I teach fierce self-compassion workshops, I have people say like, no, like might be no to yourself, no to other people, no to a situation. But it's just much more energizing. Maybe roll your shoulders back and sit up tall. That's a form of compassion as well, caring for yourself. It just depends on what you need in the moment. But usually we need some element of both fierce and tender self-compassion, I find.
Being an emotionally intelligent, resilient, and mindful person is super tough. Like, it is so hard. Even in moments where you're trained and you have the skill set, it really takes a lot of effort. I feel like part of what burns people out is not only the lack of knowledge, it's even once you know it, it's action and taking action and executing on the knowledge practically, where you also have to be okay if you may not necessarily get the result. And you were talking about awareness earlier. What are some practical ways people can practice cultivating awareness around how they can start finding the pockets where they can build in self compassion?
So I got to push back on you a little bit, Jonathan.
Okay.
Awareness is not effortful, it's effortless. Compassion actually feels like a relief. It doesn't feel like more work. If it feels like it's a lot of effort and that it's really hard and you're really struggling, it may be that you're trying too hard. I mean, I'm not saying you in particular, but just in general, that's often a signal. So if you think about it, like this is like striving to get it right and make it a tight fist. Awareness and warmth is just like opening your fist. It actually feels like a relief. The problem is we're so conditioned to this tight fist and getting through life by battling our way through. And yes, our brains are designed to worry and they've got a negativity bias and all that. So, what's kicked up in terms of the thoughts and emotions we have, there's often a lot of struggle in those. But if you think of awareness as like the warm, loving space in which these emotions arise, it actually doesn't take effort. It's usually what we need to be doing is focusing on letting go of some of that effort and opening. So if you're coming from the mindset of the doer and the striver and trying to get everything right, and you're also trying to approach mindfulness and compassion from that same mindset of the doer and the striver and trying to get everything right, it's going to feel very difficult. But if instead you kind of just shift out of the doer and striver and just like, oh, okay, I'm just the awareness, you're already aware. You're aware of whatever you're aware of, the thing that's constant is that your awareness is there. So it's just more of about a matter of kind of letting go and taking a bigger perspective. Sometimes, Jonathan, I do this quite literally. I imagine that I am this wide open space, like in front of me, behind me, around me. And this space is not a cold space, it's a warm, loving space. And then so maybe I'm thinking of a difficulty or a problem or I'm having a difficult emotion. I don't identify with that problem or emotion in the sense that that is me. No, what is actually me is just this wide open space of awareness. And when you make that shift, then things aren't so overwhelming. And then you can just take a little less effort. So it is true. I mean, I'm not going to say like I'm mindful and aware all the time because what's difficult is the fact that our conditioning is towards striving, effort, negativity, criticism, all that is totally natural. So it's difficult not to do that, but the awareness, which it's not like it's just taking a mind shift perspective outside of the problem instead of trying to fight it from within the problem, if that makes sense.
It definitely makes sense. The reason it makes sense is because another great book, The Body Keeps the Score, Dr. Bessel van der Kolk, where he talks about the more body awareness you have, more mental awareness you develop. And so, like, physically changing my body, developing more control, particularly over my core, helped me gain more self awareness emotionally, mentally. And the reason I bring it up, to your point, is the push and the pull. Because sometimes when you have a hamstring that's sore, you actually need to stretch your quad. Sometimes when you want to develop your chest, you actually have to be more mindful of how you're developing your back. And so it's those pushing and the pulling of the muscles that helps to shape the body more holistically. Going back to that earlier point about a multidimensional approach. And so when you talk about this idea of letting go, how does self-compassion play a role in inner child?
It can be very effective to relate to yourself as if like you're an adult relating to your inner child, the one that's been wounded. I really like internal family systems therapy, which talks about different parts of ourselves. So we have often like young childlike parts who often hold the wounds of maybe rejection or fear or insecurity when we're young. We also have parts that are like firefighter parts, the ones that get angry or maybe that like shut down to try to protect those childlike parts. So we have many inner children and we have some, like, snarky adolescents in there too, right? That are still playing a role even later on in life. So really, what happens think of self-compassion itself as a mindset shift. Normally, we are identified with what's happening, especially when what's happening is painful. So that might be the inner child who feels frightened or insecure, or the angry adolescent, but or the feeling like this hurts or whatever's arising. So we are identified with the suffering. And of course, the sense of self. is strong with that suffering. Me, I'm suffering, or I'm not wounded, or I'm unwanted, or whatever it is. The sense of self is very strong. With self-compassion, we're moving away from the self part into the compassion part. And so when you're in a state of compassion, think about it when you feel compassion for a friend. Your sense of self and separation kind of dissolves. You just kind of naturally with your friend, you're present with them because you care. You don't have to try to do it. It just comes up naturally. The warmth is naturally there. So we're moving away from the suffering self into, again, this kind of broader, bigger, wider space of warmth and presence. When we relate to, let's say, our inner child, we're relating from that compassionate presence. Sometimes I talk about it as loving, connected presence, which is the three components of self compassion, kindness, as common humanity, and mindfulness, loving, connected presence. So when you're in a state of loving, connected presence, it's like you're the idealized adult or parent. You probably no one had parents who are always loving, connected, and present, but ideally you would be. So you're adopting that perspective toward the suffering parts of you.
As we round this thing out, I have two more questions for you. If all your work was to be erased tomorrow, God forbid, and you had one message to share about self-compassion, what would it be?
Be a supportive friend to yourself because really that's where it starts. You're the one who is with yourself 24/7. The way you relate to yourself impacts not only your own well-being, but the well-being of every single person you come into contact with. So cultivating a good relationship, a friendly, supportive relationship with yourself is probably the most important thing you can do.
And then the final question that I pose to all the guests that come on the podcast, I'll now pose to you. If the future version of yourself from 10 years from now were to fly in and offer you some advice in order to get there, what do you think she would say to you?
I think she would say, "You're on the right track, Kristen. You're growing, you're learning. Just yeah, keep on being as you are and loving as you are." I think she would just give me encouragement. I don't think she would give me any. Could be wrong, but I don't think she would want me to do anything differently. Oh, and buy Bitcoin. No, sorry. I didn't miss that one. Where
I
were you
didn't
10 years ago?
I did not see that one coming. Be kind to yourself, by Bitcoin. Thank you so much. This was so much fun. I'm really grateful for the time today, your insight. I know the audience is going to want to keep up with your journey. Please let them know where they can find you.
Wonderful. Yeah. So if you go to my website, selfcompassion.org, if you just Google self-compassion, you'll find me because I got in early. Yet I have a community if you want some live events with me or self-compassion mentoring, and I teach workshops and I have a lot of books. I've tried to make it really easy. There's a lot of free stuff, free guided practices on my website. You can take a scale to measure self-compassion. So it's really the best place to start is selfcompassion.org.
Amazing. Thank you again. If you got any value out of this episode, please rate, review, and subscribe to the podcast. Once again, my name is Jonathan Cohen, and this is Inside the Inspired.